WarioWare Get It Together, Wario's premier title on the Switch, offering the usual fast-paced thinking the series is known for, while mixing it up with a new character-centric spin on the formula. Full disclosure, I'm not overly familiar with this series. I'm really only well acquainted with smooth moves on the Wii, but even so, the significance of this change is undeniable. With 20 characters, each having their own unique controls, Get It Together sacrifices casual accessibility for increased replayability and variety. This change was likely so dedicated players would get more out of the experience, but with multiplayer being heavily integrated throughout each mode, Get It Together's best played with a friend. In this video, I'm going to lay out what I found to be the best and the worst aspects of this game. Be warned that full spoilers for WarioWare Get It Together are on the table. The best. Number 1, the WarioWare formula. Despite the new structure, WarioWare's fast-paced microgame formula is a lot of fun. It's all about figuring out what a game wants you to do, doing it as quickly as you can, and repeating that over and over. There's a captivating simplicity to it, with plenty of snappy, entertaining microgames on offer. You'll blow through this story mode before you know it. Most microgames are direct and easy to understand, asking players to complete basic things like shutting a curtain or knocking something over, with a large range of difficulty depending on who you're controlling. This addictive format is the tried and true strength of the WarioWare series, but there's a major new gimmick shaking it up even more. Number 2, the crew. This series has always showcased a colorful cast of weirdos, and Get It Together boldly makes 20 of them playable. As opposed to the traditional touch-based controls, it's more like a 2D platformer now, but that largely depends on who you're playing. Every character controls differently, and most are easy to get a handle on. Although some of their abilities overlap, each one's distinct in its own way. Easy-to-use characters like Ashley and Orbulon are wonderful in nearly every situation since they're so easy to move and aim with. But others, like Cat, who never stop bouncing, or 5V, who moves by warping around, are more of a coin toss because they're so much more restrictive. It's easy to pick favorites, but there's such a large range of abilities that using everyone ensures constant engagement with microgames. There are just so many possible combinations, you'll always find new challenges. This facet of the game isn't perfect, and does create some problems, but I'll touch on those more later. In any case, the new focus guarantees the WarioWare cast is more lovable than ever, and their voice clips and ridiculous cutscenes lend them a lot of personality. Yeah, making them the highlight of this game was a great choice. Number 3, modes and the Wario Cup. Get It Together has a lot of ways to play with friends, setting up microgames in a plethora of fun modes. Considering how thoroughly designed these characters are, it's great so many challenges were crafted to make the most of their potential. Working with or against each other, there's a lot to choose from. There's even a battle mode. Not all of these side attractions are worth more than a few minutes, and it's a real shame most of them can't be played solo, but they're essential to the party game feel WarioWare excels at. Of the single-player offerings, the standout is absolutely the Wario Cup, a weekly challenge where you never know what you're gonna get. These tests require a thorough mastery of each crew member's abilities to complete microgames as fast and efficiently as possible. They can get really creative, sometimes even introducing new ways of playing you won't find anywhere else in the game. It's satisfying to keep getting better at them, and the rewards for doing so are useful. Look at this, I'm controlling 2 Pioros at the same time, something I never knew I wanted. If you're the type who likes to hone your microgame efficiency, you'll love this stuff. Number 4, Nintendo microgames. Of the many microgames WarioWare offers, the Nintendo-themed selections are always the most endearing. These kinds of references are obviously better appreciated the more familiar you are with Nintendo's history and franchises, and they're not afraid to make some some deep cuts, even referencing when the company used to make toys. This is such a simple inclusion, but adds so much to the presentation. You have your Mario-themed ones, of course, but even Animal Crossing, Breath of the Wild, and Pikmin show up. Some of these can rely a bit too much on knowing the source material to understand what you need to do, like the Splatoon game, but it's easy enough to catch on. Tying them all up nicely is easily the best boss microgame in Get It Together, a novel character run through 3 different Super Mario World levels. The authentic music and visuals couldn't kick the nostalgia senses harder if they tried. Although they're a small part of the overall experience, these microgames are a fun celebration of Nintendo's history, and contribute a lot to WarioWare's character. Number 5, customization. Coins are given out all the time, for accomplishing just about anything, and I'm shocked they actually have a satisfying utility. Using these in the Cluckade will net you tons of prezzies to give your crew members, unlocking loads of character customization, artwork, and even boosting your online scoring with that character, which is kind of a strange choice. But this personalization is a brilliant pairing to this game. You can give prezzies to everybody or just your favorites. There's a lot of freedom with this system, and highlights the character-centric focus of the game even more. Cutie Pie's my favorite, colorful and shimmery. Yee! This stuff makes collecting coins exciting, and the novel gift-giving like-dislike system involved with it is a clever way to keep the process interesting. I honestly didn't expect something like this in the game, but it's well implemented and unsurprisingly addictive. Get It Together understands the appeal of this series well, while also expanding it with new mechanics and ideas. But naturally, when going in such a new direction, some things will inevitably become lost that not everyone's gonna be a fan of. The worst, number 1, boss microgames. The longer microgames finishing story stages are known as boss microgames, and these aren't great. Of course, the Super Mario World one I mentioned earlier is an obvious exception, but good god are the rest of these boring. They're way too slow, often asking you to do some mundane task over and over. They're horribly uninteresting. I chalk this up to having to design them with all 20 characters in mind, but even so, these are unimaginative and tedious. Sorting items for delivery, raising and lowering a bridge, squishing grapes, come on. The Poseidon game isn't too bad, but it's short and repetitive. Ride the Line is a little better for the odd job ones, mostly because you can get through it quickly, but I'm grasping at this point. Rock Climber's another dud. It's just not fun to move this character up the cliff, but at least it's one of the shorter ones. Safari is condescendingly easy, a sluggish tour through a zoo with brain-dead questions at the end. At least the art style's cute. Oh, and we can't forget Spiky Wario, the first boss microgame. Man, is this one dull. Smacking these enemies with slow transitions through each phase. I had some expectations for Potty Pursuit, since it's the final boss microgame, but this honestly feels like the first thing anyone came up with when deciding what the final strange microgame should be. An aimless stroll through a volcano while avoiding hazards to grab a toilet. It's trying. I can see it. I know you want to have that WarioWare quirkiness, Potty Pursuit, but this falls flat. Let's get into this. Number 2, going through the motions. WarioWare's always been a strange series. It prizes itself on how random and bizarre it can be. On all accounts, Get It Together is doing what WarioWare's always done in regards to weirdness, but something about how it's portrayed here feels played out and stale. Like the game saying, OMG, wasn't that weird? Random, right? I know I'm only well acquainted with smooth moves, but there's a distinct feeling to manufactured weirdness, one that's present throughout a lot of this game. Don't get me wrong, some of these moments work great, and there's enough quirkiness holding up the main story, but too often the wacky tone of the game feels forced. Like the strangeness was randomly generated, and because of that, it's rarely memorable. The Potty Pursuit microgame is a good example. On paper, it sounds solid. Chase down a toilet with googly eyes through a volcano until you're erupting over the horizon with another volcano in sight that looks like Wario's chin. But in practice, it feels hollow, and comes off like a superficial understanding of WarioWare's tone and identity. This is kind of a hard point to convey. You either feel this way about it or not, and it doesn't ruin the game or anything, but it's noticeable to someone familiar with this series. The more limited aesthetic style contributes to this as well. Number 3, a strict formula. The new character-centric format, as deep as it can be, inhibits microgame design quite a bit. In the past, all sorts of perspectives, controls, and visuals could be used for more variety, whereas Get It Together always uses a flat, cartoonish aesthetic to match the 2D characters and their rigid mobility. Because of this, microgames are a lot more limited in what they can be, feeling more homogenized than usual. Outside of a few unique characters, a lot of microgames will play out the same for most of the crew. Some characters are really terrible at certain games, requiring immediate reaction with exceptional precision to make it through. And because of this, knowing how your moves will behave is essential. Take Orbulon. He can suck up things with his tractor beam, but not everything. And there's no visual way this is communicated. If it was consistent with how it manipulated objects, that would be fine, but it isn't, so you won't know how it'll react with something until you try. For example, in this microgame, he can suck up enormous block walls, but in this one, he can't even suck up blocks, and has to drag them off the plate to destroy them. The effect is inconsistent and not conveyed well to the player. Some characters only need to touch something to interact with it, while others have to shoot a projectile even though they can touch it all the same. When every second counts, you need to know exactly how things will behave when a microgame starts, but losses can easily occur since you won't always know how things work together until it's too late. It doesn't feel great to lose because of a small, finicky detail, and with how many combinations are possible, it's not likely you'll learn all of them. This extends to my next point. Number 4, reduced accessibility. The WarioWare formula has always worked well as a party game with friends, but Get It Together is a big step up in complexity in having multiple characters. Even though they're simple at their core, it takes time to fully understand their limitations. Because of this, jumping into multiplayer mode with a friend who hasn't played the game can be pretty rough, since these modes demand a lot of familiarity with their mechanics. There's a lot to learn here, and some of the more complicated characters, like Penny and Pioro, can be a big hurdle if you haven't spent time learning them. Fortunately, the story mode introduces crew members at a comfortable pace, with carefully chosen microgames so each character is as easy to learn as possible. Unfortunately, the story mode might actually be too essential, and almost feels like a requirement for new players to play and understand everything. My point is, Get It Together's multiplayer modes are a lot harder to jump into than past entries. These characters require experimentation to play with confidence, and although this creates a system that's more rewarding with time, it's far less approachable to casual players as a result. Number 5, Gotta Bounce. I just don't like this microgame, okay? It's boring. There's nothing interesting to me about keeping something in the air, especially when it's this mundane. I get it, this is a single side game and not a big deal, but I still don't like it. Why do games like including these kinds of challenges anyway? Repetitive, arbitrary tasks that take a lot of time to do but are really easy to mess up. This one's nowhere near as frustrating as they can be, considering there's barely a reward for bothering with it, which I am grateful for, but still, it's a low quality addition that won't enrich your experience. But that's actually it. Get It Together's a pretty fun game, especially if you have a friend to enjoy it with. The new ideas it presents are commendable, and although they create some issues in turn, it's always nice to see creators mix things up with a fairly iterative series. If you're a fan of WarioWare, it's worth trying out, but if you're unsure whether you'll like the new gameplay style, you can pass without missing much. While it's unlikely to blow you away, WarioWare Get It Together's a solid game and effective at what it wants to be. Fast-paced nonsense. And I do love Pioro. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked my video, subscribe and check out my Patreon. I'll see you next time.